Breaking news from Writing with Andrew. We've just received word that you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Welcome back, everyone, to another installment of What the Popularizers are up to. To this point, we've taken a look at various science communicators here on YouTube to talk about the rhetorical strategies that they use to get audiences of non-scientists interested in scientific stuff. And before we get into the fun of today's topic, which is, well, fun, it's worth remembering a few things. First, the things I'm sharing today are based on my dissertation research and my own questions about why there isn't a rhetoric or literature popularizer for every physics and engineering popularizer. Of course, I get pretty excited about writing and rhetoric, so it's not just that science is cool and rhetoric isn't, but rather it seems to be that science popularizers are doing things that people in the humanities, kind of ironically, don't seem to be as willing to do. I've mentioned this before, but when I was starting on this project, I heard a lot of my colleagues and professors say that there probably weren't humanities communicators because the humanities are too abstract and theoretical, and it would be impossible to do them justice among the public. Now, obviously, I found that unconvincing, but I also found it pretty off-putting. I just don't like the idea that knowledge of rhetoric, for example, needs to be kept in academic journals and conferences. And in a similar way, I don't like the idea that the only way to do rhetoric is to do academic rhetoric. My goal is not to train academic researchers or to talk about things like rhetoric or poetry so that people can write their master's theses. My goal is to share what I find exciting and useful about my discipline, to show other people what it's all about. And that's what science communicators are doing. Discussions of popularizers always seem to draw the contention that science communication is somehow less than research science, that it's somehow a failing of science communicators when they show off their vacuum tube ping pong ball launchers instead of training the public in every minute step of the scientific method. But it's important to remember that that's not really even what popularizers are trying to do. If you want scientific training, go to the PhD programs that train scientists. Science communicators don't need to duplicate that effort, so instead they work, like we talked about in the first video in this series, to showcase the wonder and usefulness of scientific knowledge more than to document how that knowledge came to be in the way that a peer-reviewed paper might. The goal may not be to train scientists, but it might be something more like inspiring the next generation of scientists to pursue that training, or, at the very least, to tell people why science is worthwhile so that they'll support policies and programs that do benefit research scientists. So, why complain that a popularizer isn't training people in specialized research methods when that isn't even really their goal? To me, that feels an awful lot like complaining that your slotted spoon isn't a very good ladle, and to be clear, it's not, but it's also not trying to be one. Science researchers run peer-reviewed studies. Science communicators ignite the spark of scientific interest. And one of the hallmark tools they use to do that job is the thoroughly unscientific tool of fun. So what do I mean by fun? Well, I could tell you, but why not show you? Oh, best friend, whom I love so much, do you think you could do that projectory eyeball-y thing that you're so very good at? I mean, it would be fun, and we're here to have fun, so what do you say? Oh, don't be like that. Come on, I mean, everyone thinks you're cool and that you're smart and fun, and it would mean a lot to them if you played along. See what a good friend you are. Ha 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 ha! Oh, what a hoot. Well, anyway, before we get into the high theory of fun, let's just take a look at a few examples of the ways that popularizers have fun. There are as many different ways to do it as there are people doing it, so we'll see a few of them. And as an extra fun bonus, we might just throw a few non-scientists into the mix today. Because, most popularizers seem to be science popularizers, but there are a few brave souls outside the sciences doing the work as well. Now, if you're a laboratory chemist, any old series of reactions might just be enough to get you out of bed in the morning. But most people aren't laboratory chemists, and that's where Niall Redd's demonstrations of synthetic chemistry come into play. Why give a lecture about chemistry when you can show people how to make grape soda out of plastic gloves, how to make decaf Red Bull, or even how to make light pass through wood? From the start, there's an element of fun in Niall Redd's chemistry. There's a playfulness in presenting the journey from glove to grape soda. And there's a difference between teaching people the kind of chemistry they need to know in order to pass a test or become a chemist on the one hand, and then showing people the joy of doing chemistry just for the fun of it on the other. Scroll through the comments and you'll see people joining in on the fun as well. But where that kind of chemistry shows concrete observable phenomena, we run into the arts and humanities problem of abstract theory. Surely there's no fun to be had there. Hey now, we all know you don't mean that. Well now, wouldn't that be fun? But you know what else is fun? 8-bit music theory's approach to the abstract and theoretical world of music theory. You know, if you're training academic music theorists, have mercy, you could just record lectures on leitmotifs, the ins and outs of jazz solos, or principles for writing great melodies. You sure could, and if your audience is academic music theorists, that abstracted, here's what you need to know approach might just do the trick. But if you're trying to popularize music theory, you'll need to recognize that your audience isn't composed of academic music theorists, so there's a lot to be gained by having fun with music theory, and maybe then you decide to make videos about Leitmotif and Hollow Knight, or why the Pepsi Man theme shreds in all caps. Or maybe about how a theme from a beloved Mario game does the things that great melodies do. And we're having fun all along the way, while still talking about the real music theory behind these things. Take, for example, this fun little moment.
I'm going to talk about another one of the best pieces of music in the Mario canon, the Gusty Garden Galaxy theme from Super Mario Galaxy. To write a great melody that can communicate with a listener requires both a perceptible internal logic and a sense of fluency for the melody to be coherent and sound natural. If there's no logic to follow, the melody sounds like random notes, or maybe like a language that you don't understand. But if the melody follows too strictly a line of logic, if the bones of how the melody is constructed are too obvious, then the melody can sound more like a stiff musical exercise. In Fundamentals of Musical Composition, Arnold Schoenberg writes about finding the right balance between these two extremes by figuring out the appropriate amounts of variation and repetition to use when composing music. Intelligibility in music seems to be impossible without repetition. While repetition without variation can easily produce monotony, juxtaposition of distantly related elements can easily degenerate into nonsense. Only so much variation as character, length, and tempo required should be admitted. The coherence of motive forms should be emphasized.
Ah, poor Arnold. He just never stood a chance, did he? But at any rate, 8-bit music theory shows what too few academics are willing to show, that the knowledge of their disciplines, while useful, interesting, and worthwhile, is not sacrosanct. So why not poke a little fun at the influential composer along the way? We're not going to learn less just because we've lightened up a little. Now that said, philosophers are infamously humorless. The quest for truth is serious business after all, or at least that's the impression you might get from academic philosophy. Popularized philosophy, though, well, maybe there's some room for fun there, cringe though it may be.
Hi, hey, how are you? Cringe, let's talk about it. The word cringe has taken over my vocabulary lately. It just pops into my head all the time. Like when I randomly remember that month back in 2013 when all of my Facebook posts were just lyrics to Kesha songs rewritten in iambic pentameter. Why? What audience was that for? Who is this inconceivable person I used to be? Cringe. Mega cringe. I think I say this word like 50 times a day. Cringe, cringe, cringe. And I'm not the only one.
So like the previous videos, we start with a fun topic, not epistemology, deontology, utilitarianism, or ethics in theory. Instead, from a creator with specialized knowledge in philosophy, we get to enjoy a discussion of cringe in practice.
Often it's the violation of an implicit social norm that makes us cringe. There's no law of state or even of etiquette that tells you exactly how loud you're supposed to speak at a wedding. It's something you have to intuit based on context. How loud are other people speaking? Is the ceremony about to begin and we're all supposed to be quiet now? According to YouTuber Vsauce Michael here, the function of awkwardness is that
it sands social dynamics by smoothing out what even etiquette doesn't rule on.
Cringe is the electric shock, the emotional punishment for being awkward. It enforces the limits of socially acceptable behavior by wounding the ego. And memories of your cringy moments are often just as painful as the moments themselves.
So there's fun in the topic, fun in self-deprecation, fun in referencing other creators in playful ways, and even fun in the presentation, costuming, and set design, as we can see in these clips and also throughout the video. Clearly, ContraPoints is not a channel discussing philosophy as an assignment or chore. There's an element of fun in the visuals, humor, and delivery. Viewers will be able to learn a thing or two, to be sure, but importantly, they'll also be enjoying it. And it's a good thing too, because we're talking about a video that's nearly an hour and a half long. See, PhD students in a 90-minute seminar will, well, first of all, count themselves lucky that class is only half as long this week, but they'll sit through it no matter how fun it isn't, because they're there to be trained as scientists or philosophers or literary critics. The general public is not watching a 90-minute video for job training, so the fun of it all keeps them engaged with the actual content of the video. Now, in any of these videos and many others, we can see popularizers of various disciplines, from science to music theory, sharing knowledge by making it fun. Of course, not every viewer will find every video fun. No one creator can be all things to all people, and while there may be some overlap, Nile Red and ContraPoints probably don't speak to the same audiences. They talk about different things in different ways, and they position it all as fun for probably different people. But they found an audience either way, and the comments on both channels make it clear that the people who do show up are having a good time. But anyway, having fun is nice and all, but shouldn't we be teaching people? Isn't fun at odds with learning? Sure, make it fun, but how much knowledge has to be displaced to make room for that fun? Well, my dear friend, I am so very glad you asked. At some point, someone somewhere is going to have to explain to me where we got the idea that learning had to be dry, serious work, and that enjoyment somehow cheapened knowledge. I mean, we've all seen it, the professor who assigns piles of reading and lengthy papers with minimal guidelines, or the one who requires you to do an uncountable number of math problems, and then take tests where every question has an option D, all of the above, and option E, none of the above, so that every exam comes with a heaping dose of self-doubt and existential dread. I've taken classes that I've hated going to, and I'd argue that at the root of these phenomena are professors who have mistaken antipathy for rigor. But hey, guess what, everyone? Misery does not make things more rigorous. Well, maybe etymologically, but not in the way that we use the word now. Academic disciplines are attached to bodies of knowledge, and there are standards that knowledge is measured against. But who decided that maintaining standards also meant making things so darn boring? Okay, but here's the point. We've also all seen educators who showcase their passion and enjoyment in what they teach. You know, the ones who light us up with enthusiasm for the subject. Before I specialized, I liked my science, math, and history classes, but my English teachers and professors inspired me. Ultimately, I decided to pursue writing and rhetoric because even the boring parts, the grammar worksheets and punctuation quizzes, were fun for me. So imagine what this channel would be if I had never seen my teachers have fun with the discipline, or if they had never allowed me to have fun with it. And even now, I can say that my student evaluations regularly mention my passion for the content and the humor that I bring to class. But between you and me, if I have to stand at the front of a room and talk about writing for an hour at a time, I'm just doing whatever it takes to entertain myself before I can retreat to the quiet solitude of my office. But hey, having fun benefits the class too, so I guess that's nice. Well, fine, but while you're having fun messing around in creative writing, we have real science to do, and I'm not going to water that down with fun and games. Oh, I should also mention that another common theme in my evaluations has been that I'm a hard grader, so it looks like enjoyment and standards aren't quite mutually exclusive. But hey, don't take my word for it. Let's look at this excerpt from one of Native Lang's earliest videos.
There are two ways to trace a more distant origin. First, we might discover that a word was influenced by or borrowed from another dialect or another language, like the English word chief, which was borrowed from French. In this case, our etymology can continue in that source language. Second, we can increase our time depth by comparing related languages and engaging in the process of historical reconstructions, a clever intellectual development I introduced in the lesson on historical linguistics. Therefore, as much as possible, our etymology will take into account the history of borrowing and influence, and will terminate at the earliest reconstructible form of a word, not the earliest attested form. For example, the Old English word quain can be compared to other early Germanic words, like the Gothic quains or the Old Norse kven, allowing us to reconstruct the Proto-Germanic ancestral form as quan is. When we compare the Proto-Germanic word to cognates in other non-Germanic Indo-European languages, like the ancient Greek word gune and the Sanskrit gna, we can begin to reconstruct a Proto-Indo-European root like gun or gwen.
So, we get a reasonable introduction to some historical linguistics methodology by reconstructing earlier forms of words by comparing sounds. It's accurate information presented in straightforward black and white text. But Native Lang's most popular video tells an animated story about how researchers have been reconstructing the sound of ancient Egyptian. And it's a fun little jaunt through a history of discovery, the study of language, and even the creator's personal interest in Egypt that was born of TV history documentaries. And at one point, we get a similar presentation on historical linguistics.
These traits echo in the streets of Cairo today, where you won't hear the latest form of Coptic, but Masri, or Egyptian Arabic. Arabic is in the Semitic branch of Afroasiatic, and by the way, it was in Arabic that medieval scholars made the first attempts at relating hieroglyphs to Coptic sounds. Who else should have these family resemblances but Egyptian? Afroasiatic linguists placed Egypt in its own branch. They compared these various branches and traced them back to a common ancestor, Proto-Afroasiatic, leaving us with a picture of the position of Egyptian within a family. Now you could look for sounds by rewinding up from Coptic to ancient Egyptian. You could also start to fast forward down from prehistory and triangulate sounds from a more remote past, ancient even to them. Sure, Coptic easily fills in the E in rin and the A in tep. On the other hand, there are words where Coptic doesn't match the vowels in its Afroasiatic relatives. In fact, it looks like many O's must have been earlier A's. Anok, the pronoun I, came from an older Yanak. And do you remember the way I said the word for person with an O, Roma? Well, that shifted from earlier Ramat. And when I guessed that beautiful might be Nafrat or Nofrat, well, now we know why. It changed in stages from Nafrat to Nofra.
The first video is titled Etymology, Sound Change, Roots and Derivation, and then in parentheses, Etymology 1 of 2, which sounds thoroughly informative and academic. The second one is called What Ancient Egyptians Sounded Like and How We Know, which sounds, kind of fun. The second video manages to be just as informative while also being enjoyable. So it seems highly possible for good information and fun to coexist. And the first video has accrued something like 100,000 views in 13 years, while the second one has brought in 15 million views in 3. Where the goal is popularizing, the fun approach has clearly made historical linguistics more popular than the first approach. But the fun approach has also succeeded in teaching more people the same thing than the academic one did. You can learn and have fun, and more people will be willing to learn if they can also have fun at the same time. Now, I've already confessed that I'm one of those oddballs who would do grammar worksheets for fun, and that's why I went on to get training as a writing scholar. I recognize, though, that most people are not in it for the grammar worksheets. But I also wish that so many more people knew about rhetoric and cared about poetry, so this show isn't called Grammar Worksheets with Andrew. Do I believe that you ought to have a really solid understanding of grammar to be a scholar in the field of rhetoric? Absolutely, I do. But do real people who aren't scholars need to spend years doing grammar worksheets to appreciate rhetoric and make use of it in their lives? No. So if someone learned about rhetoric from me, thought it was fun and interesting, and then went on to get a deeper education in the field, well, I think that would be a win for the discipline. I really don't see how popularizing cheapens a discipline. As far as I can tell, it could only enrich it by bringing more people in. And that's the point, really. I do what I do because I think it's fun. I like doing it, and because it adds so much value to my life, I want other people to know about it. And based on my own experience and the many examples of popularizers across the disciplines, having fun can and maybe even sometimes should, be the first step towards learning more. It's okay to start people off with a little fun instead of teaching them everything they'll need to know from the start. There's plenty of time to learn the rest of the stuff, and people will be much more likely to do it if they're also having a nice time. Well, now, didn't we have fun today? I know I did. See, there's a lot of fun to be had, or there would be if only we didn't so often insist on things being needlessly boring or miserable. Ah, that's a good one, bud. I'm glad you're getting into the spirit of things. See, we have fun. But anyway, if you see communication as a purely informational transaction from one brain to another, then all the fun and playfulness and humor that popularizers employ may just seem like extraneous noise. After all, that second native Lang video we watched was nearly twice as long as the much more utilitarian one that preceded it. If you're going to teach me historical linguistics, why clog it up with stories and music and animations? But however, if you, like the most effective popularizers, recognize that there's more to communication than information, then all of the stuff that popularizers do and that lab reports don't become not distractions, but exactly the point. It's like Augustine of Hippo said not too long ago. We often have to take bitter medicines, and we must always avoid sweet things that are dangerous. But what better than sweet things that give health, or medicines that are sweet? The more we are attracted by sweetness, the easier it is for medicine to do its healing work. There's just no rule that learning has to be bitter, that science has to be boring, or that rhetoric has to be dull and lifeless. Like any savvy rhetorician, popularizers know that a little bit of fun can make all the difference when it comes to sharing the amazing things that scholars and researchers know. So maybe let's all consider lightening up a little and not insisting that learning be as unpalatable as possible. I mean, aside from the self-indulgent collapse of global civilization, what's the worst thing that could happen if people were allowed to learn things and like them at the same time? Now, I'm sure you, like me, shudder to think of the consequences, but at the same time, I do want to say thanks to you for hanging out with me today to talk about fun. Maybe it's a little bit like analyzing jokes. They kind of stop being funny once you've cracked the code. So, I don't know, maybe the fun has run its course. Either way, though, thanks again for being here. Now, go on and have some fun before we meet again next week to add on even a little more.